And now for Interplay.
All right, here we are with our esteemed jazz composers, students, and faculty alike, and Jim, who's going to lead us through a lot of the questions that you asked. So, Jim, want to start us off with something?
Yeah, so everybody wants to know how long it takes to write these pieces.
We've already been laughing about that a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think, Thomas?
Really just depends on the deadline. I think sometimes it can actually be beneficial if we have a deadline that's really, very soon, because it sort of forces us to, be very instinctual about how we go about the writing process, and we sort of trust our gut a little more. We don't second guess ourselves, but yeah, it can vary widely how long it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree with Thomas as well on that. Setting personal deadlines and having other people set deadlines for you really helps streamline the process, just because you know that if you don't meet that deadline, you're going to be letting someone down.
Yeah.
It's also difficult to measure when writing the piece starts. Because there's a period of days or months or years or whatever where that's been sort of percolating, and am I writing that tune yet or not? I don't know, but there's definitely a part of the process where you feel sort of like the half-life of radioactive elements, where you feel like, okay, I put in 5 hours and I really made a lot of progress, and the next 5 hours only gets me halfway toward that goal, and 5 more hours only gets, it never quite gets there. It's always just sort of narrowing the gap between your ambitions and the deadline realities of what you can get on paper.
Yeah. Cool. I got another question. There's a lot of them here, I see.
Yeah,
Thanks for that, everybody. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, another general question for everybody is if you ever consider your pieces to be done, or if there's a lot of revising that goes on after the fact.
I think the revision process is, there's always a nagging sense, that oh, I could change this, or I could revise this, or, I could put a transition here, or I could do something different here that didn't quite work out in the first performance or something like that. So yeah, but again, with the deadline, you present something that is finished, but that has the potential for revision or modification in the future.
Yeah. I mean, remember Ellington recorded multiple versions of a lot of his most popular things, redid it a bunch of times. Maybe not changing the piece that much, or sometimes even doing that. But anyway, multiple versions are definitely possible, especially over long periods of time. Yeah. But I don't know if anybody feels like they're really always completely done with anything, right? I mean, it's like what you were talking about, Dr. Mills.
It's part of your motivation to start the next one rather than looking in the rearview mirror and fixing everything that wasn't perfect. It's just like, well, write a better one. It sort of kind of gets the sort of less than 100% satisfaction is a big motivation for the next piece.
Yeah. Cool. Got another one?
Yeah, I've got one for Thomas. Are there genres outside of jazz that influence either that piece or your pieces in general?
Oh, absolutely. Classical music, composers such as Bartók or Debussy, music from different parts of the world. I've been very fascinated by Brazilian music from the 70s and 80s in the last couple of years. R&B and hip hop music, from all different points of the last really 50 years, absolutely. And it's always fun to try and sort of import that into the music that I write somehow for the ensemble, because it's, it can present itself in very unique ways when you try to integrate it somehow. But yeah.
Cool.
Since you mentioned Bartók, here's a question for Ben. If there were difficulties in adapting that classical piece to a big band, and if there's anything different about writing in 5 or odd meters than 4.
Adapting the piece wasn't too difficult for me. The typical kind of writing processes. I was able to employ in terms of harmonizing the melody and reconfiguring portions of the melody to fit the 5/4 time signature that I had established. There were a few difficulties in. So I was influenced by another piece as well, a Bob Brookmeyer piece entitled ABC Blues, where Bob Brookmeyer created this 10-note tone row, and I tried to incorporate that into my piece, maybe with different degrees of success and failure, as some of the dissonances that I tried to impart in certain sections maybe were a little too much, or just not configured and written for the band in in a way where they could be executed. So I did run into a few problems at those points, and that's just something for me to learn from and grow from in more pieces where I attempt this process again.
All right, cool.
Okay. Do a question for John. Is writer's block a thing that happens for composers, and how do you deal with that?
Well, it's certainly possible. I think maybe one thing that would cause writer's block is having a sense that this next piece is going to be your masterpiece. That's like an enemy, because because you're afraid of somehow making a mistake. And I think there's something about just sort of being more casual and sort of tuning into what do I want to write right now, without any for self-satisfaction rather than that sort of takes the pressure off it. You find something that's fun for you to do. It's not being judged in any way. I think that's kind of the best attitude for going into that. Sometimes it might mean just sort of switching your goals. If you're trying to, you're starting your masterpiece opera and you're looking at a blank page one, and nothing's coming to you. Maybe write a R&B tune. Just keep the wheels turning.
Excellent idea.
Yeah, keep the wheels turning, but not being too judgmental and allowing yourself to be flexible about it.
Cool.
Okay. Paulo, how did you decide what to keep and what to get rid of as far as the Miles recording and your arrangement?
I wanted to keep certain motifs of the melody, like obviously the intro figure that happens in the bass that Ron Cotter plays on the recording. I wanted to keep that because that's it's like a telltale sign that you're listening to someone playing Seven Steps to Heaven. So I wanted to keep that as part of the intro, and then also the kind of 4-note motif that happens at the very beginning of the melody. I definitely wanted to keep that as well. It happens in the sort of shout chorus trading with the drums at the very end of my arrangement again. Obviously not as staccato, but I still kind of try and keep that same melodic figure happening. And then a lot of it, I didn't necessarily not want to keep, it just didn't necessarily find its way into my arrangement necessarily, because I wanted to create something that was different than the recording and that I could really call my own rather than just a reorchestration of it.
Cool, thanks. Good.
Okay, maybe in that same vein, a general question. Do you have a different approach when you're arranging than when you're composing a new tune outright?
I personally feel, having pretty recently gone through the process of doing both, I feel like personally it was an easier first step going into an arrangement because I already have a lot laid out for me. I already have chord changes I can work with. I have a melody I can work with. It's just adding more to something that's already there and then kind of maybe shifting some things around. Whereas when I'm just composing something outright, I have to come up with everything on my own. And sometimes that can get a little bit into the sort of writer's block stage where I just don't know where I want to take the piece. But at times it's also easier because I have total freedom and liberty to just do whatever I want with it.
Right, maybe it depends on the size of the instrumentation too,
Yeah,
right? For your
definitely.
first big band project, it was probably cool to have
Yeah.
like some elements in place to start with. Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah,
And I'd say it's also cool because it is a way to sort of I guess it depends on the sort of the scope of the arranging project. If you're in school for something like this and you're taking if you're taking a Bartok piece, for example, you really can sort of become like sort of the line between arranging and composing starts to sort of get obscured in a way, because you can write solis and stuff. You can you can sort of insert your own voice into what you're doing, and that might differ possibly from if you're, say, arranging for a guest artist or something, where like a very specific, situation where you're trying to honor sort of a preconceived idea of where things are headed and, where they come from.
right, definitely the purpose of the arrangement's important.
Yeah, and the schematic.
Yeah. Well, thanks. My sincere thanks to everybody for being here today, all of you jazz composers, and thanks to liberal arts and all the team for putting this together. Really fun class today. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your great questions out there. So.